Peter Criss solo record, 1978, happens to be my fourth favorite of the solo records, and I think a lot of people would share that opinion. It wasn't a bad record. It was very well produced, but the thing is, Peter doesn't write songs. And so I feel like him being required to put out a whole record worth of songs like that was like a little too much for him, you know what I mean? And the first two records that he put out as a solo artist, I don't feel that, Casablanca really got behind those records, I feel like Peter, honestly, was one of those guys who really should have taken more time to learn his craft. The fact that he couldn't read music, I think, hurt him. And the fact that he was just so reckless, getting into these car accidents, and he punched that glass case and couldn't play for months on end, I think really hurt him. I think that Ace was the guy that could have been that rock star, that reckless type, because, Ace, they didn't want Ace to leave. They didn't want him to leave in 82, and they didn't want him to leave in the 2000s. And he left anyways. And I think that Ace also has got his own demons, because here's a guy that left the band in the 80s. He had a good solo run. Fraley's Comet was fantastic, but then he broke him up. And so, I don't know. And so he left the second time, and now it seems like all he wants to do is come back. But Peter should never have wanted to leave Kiss. I think Peter had a great thing going. Beth was just like all the stars aligned, but that's as much a Bob Ezrin song and a Stan Penridge song and maybe a little bit of a Peter Criss song. Peter can't write music. You know what I mean? And I tend to not believe Gene and Paul a lot of the times. But this is something that Gene and Paul and Ace and pretty much everybody says. Bob Ezrin basically says it, although Bob is very diplomatic. Bill Aucoin, God rest his soul, he was also very diplomatic, but it also seems like he was kind of saying it too. Peter just doesn't write music. Now, that's not a knock on Peter. You look at Bobby Blotzer from Riot, legendary rock drummer, is also somebody. Drummers generally don't write music. They technically don't play music. They're percussionists. You know what I mean? Like the old joke, what do you call a guy that hangs out with musicians? A drummer. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be rude to drummers. They're very, very important. And that connection between the drummer and the bassist is very important. Although with Kiss, I don't really think that people value it as much as with other bands. And maybe it's because Gene and Peter never really gelled in that rhythm section. I don't know. I've never heard anyone really talk about the rhythm section created between Gene and Peter. Gene's a great bass player. And Peter, even though he doesn't read music, he's a great drummer. Especially the Destroyer era, Love Gun era. That was Peter Criss at his best. So I really honestly, do you have a call coming in? No. I really honestly don't think he should have been wanting to leave the band. Ace, completely different story. Ace has got, the best solo record from the four. Ace had a great solo career. But even still, Ace probably shouldn't have left the band. You know what I mean? Especially not a second time. The second time, I think it really, really hurt him, because he had some great solos. He's had some great solos, and he linked with E1 Music, and he's got some great things going on. But is he in Kiss? No. And where does he want to be? In Kiss. And they're never going to bring him back. They're not going to bring him back after he basically dropped them twice. You know what I mean? Especially because they brought him back in the 90s, because when he dropped him after The Elder, they were like rock bottom, like literally, no pun intended. But the thing is, Peter, on the other hand, Peter had a really good thing in Kiss, and if he hadn't have been such a rock star and such a pain in the ass, but he was, because it's really because of Peter and Ace. If Peter did not want to do a solo and would have been happy in Kiss, then really the only one wanting it solo would have been Ace, and he would have been drowned out 3-1. But, Peter pushed his luck. He had the worst of the four records. I was trying to make a joke initially saying it was my fourth favorite. It sucked. And then he still pressed his luck. And then for Dynasty, he was only on one song. He still pressed his luck on the Tom Snyder Show. And then he got booted. And then those first two records that he did solo, I don't think Casablanca wanted to get behind. You know what I mean? He unmasked on the 5 o'clock news. He didn't unmask on MTV. None of that was done rock star-ish, And then in the 90s, before the reunion, when I saw him on the Bad Boys tour with Ace, he linked with Tony Nicole Tony Records, which was a little tiny record label, maybe all of a P.O. box and a 250 square foot office. And from what I've heard, that was one of the worst deals he could have possibly signed. But he was that desperate to sign a deal and have a record out. And it was a good record. But again, I don't think he wrote any of the music, because I don't think he writes music, and I don't even know if he writes lyrics. And like I said, Peter, honestly, I love him to death. I love that raspy voice of his, but he should never have left Kiss. That one, I think he learned the hard way.